Is she still admitting them? Okay. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I love seeing some familiar names. I love this.
We are now recording. I don't
Okay.
know if the new update notifies you or not.
Oh,
So
no, it didn't come like it did, but I see it now. Thank you. Okay, so welcome everyone and greetings. My name is Dr. Roblyn Luter, and I am so honored to welcome you to our dissertation defense this afternoon. I am the core faculty member. I'm a core faculty member in the International Psychology Department, and I am also the dissertation faculty lead. And so again, on behalf of the International Psychology Department, on behalf of the Chicago School, it is my pleasure and my honor to welcome you. I always say that a dissertation is truly the culmination of many, many, many years of hard work. And so your presence today means more than you would ever know. And so on behalf of our candidate, Emily, today, and our department, we thank you. I do want to go over a few ground rules before I turn it over to her amazing dissertation chair, Dr. Candace Hughes. So some of the ground rules for today. Emily will have 30 minutes of presentation time today. And during her presentation, we do ask that while she is presenting that all cameras and microphones are muted. So the only person we should see or hear during her actual presentation should be Emily. After her presentation is over, there will be a 30-minute question and answer period by her committee, and that is her dissertation chair and her two readers. And then we will open it up to the general public, that's everyone else, for you to ask questions or share comments with her, and there will be 10 minutes of question and answer for the general public. So I do not want to hold us up any longer. So I'm honored now to pass the baton over to Dr. Hughes, who will introduce Emily as well as her committee members, and we will begin this dissertation defense. Again, welcome everyone.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the introduction of how this is going to go. I want to introduce Emily as a PhD candidate in international psychology at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, who's completed the trauma specialization track as a doctoral student. She has worked as a teaching assistant for several faculty members within this department for both specific courses and field experience courses. In terms of, she has quite a CV, so I'm summarizing here, but you completed her BA in interdisciplinary studies, focusing on cultural sustainability, earned at Naropa University, an MA in clinical counseling earned at Adams State University. And additionally, Emily has completed many, many microcredit courses on a broad range of topics related to her focus on research and services for diverse population. Her professional roles and experiences have included being a licensed mental health counselor, registered play therapist, specializing in working with minority youth in Colorado, serving as a volunteer with the Red Cross on the disaster mental health and international services teams, a co-founder of EMIC Cultural Consultants Collective, which focuses on addressing systemic racism and building a culture of anti-racism, clinical counselor, school counselor based in Alamosa, editorial board member for the Journal of Family Trauma and Child Custody and Child Development, and a peer reviewer for several other journals. And just very impressive, broad range of many types of professional activities. So I'm keeping that short. I also would like to introduce our two other members of the dissertation committee, Dr. Florence Wang and Dr. Jacqueline Robinson. And I think that's about all we should do at this point in time, because we'll be talking as we get moving through, and I'm knowing about the time. So at this point, I turn it to Emily.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Lutringer. Everyone can see my slides still, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, so let's go. Thank you so much for coming to my dissertation defense. The title of my study is Lived Experiences of Resiliency in Syrian Refugee Transitional Young Adults in Germany. And I would like to thank my chair, Dr. Hughes, and my readers, Dr. Robinson and Dr. Flo, and my partner, Douglas, for all their help and support through this process. And also just a heads up, there is going to be a lot of information to cover. I'm going to be blasting through this, so please keep in mind any questions that you'd like to check out in more detail. So the background for this study is that Syria has been in a brutal civil war since there we go. That Syria has been in a brutal civil war since 2011, causing massive numbers of Syrians to be displaced. Germany has received the largest numbers of asylum seekers outside of countries neighboring Syria. Refugees experience multiple traumatic exposures, which occur prior to migrating, peri-migration, and post-migration. Transitional young adults are at a critical stage of brain development, where they are susceptible to developing mental illnesses and harmful behaviors and are vulnerable to exploitation. However, they are rarely designated as their own populations, separate from adolescents and older adults. Despite this, research has found high rates of resiliency in refugee populations globally. The problem statement is that there has been little research on this topic in population, and none of it's been qualitative. Young adults in this study spent most of their childhoods in a war zone with high exposure to traumatic events, which increase lifelong adverse outcomes. Refugees face additional challenges in acculturation. Those that experience resilience can create positive adaptations and growth in their lives. The purpose of this study is to understand the lived experiences of resilience and its barriers in Syrian refugee transitional young adults aged 18 to 26 in Germany. The use of a phenomenological design allows for contextual understandings of the subjective conceptualizations, meanings, and experiences of resilience. The primary research question of this study is, what are the lived experiences and conceptualizations of resilience for Syrian refugee transitional age young adults in Germany? Sub-questions of this are, throughout experiences in Syria, migration, and since residing in Germany, what has given participants strength and meaning in their lives, and how so? And what are the factors or barriers which inhibit resiliency for the participants? Of the conceptual and theoretical frameworks that were used, the most important to keep in mind here are social constructivism and the social ecological model. These frameworks were actively applied in analysis. So social constructivism is a critical psychology model which deconstructs and examines layers of context of how meanings and values are ascribed to labels and constructs. The social ecological model sees the development of an individual as being influenced by many layers of context. People simultaneously shape and are shaped by interconnected systems around them, such as their family, peers, workplaces, and communities. The literature review included an exhaustive search of the literature across multiple disciplines, including Syrian and German authors. This slide just gives a brief overview of the organizational structure. The following slides, we will discuss some of the more important points that have come out of research. Refugees experience an increased rate of mental illnesses over the general population, although the exact rate varies between studies. Post-migration stressors are extremely impactful on refugees' well-being. In Syria, people experience severe war traumas and human rights abuses, including torture, starvation, chemical weapons, targeted strikes on medical centers and schools, homes being bombed, arbitrary arrests, loved ones being killed or going missing, and more. Peri-migration, refugees are exposed to other traumatic situations, such as physical and sexual abuse, human trafficking, lack of food and water, etc. For children who are exposed to war and violence, trauma can have lifelong consequences for their well-being. Unaccompanied minors are especially vulnerable to exploitation. Accompanied minors benefit from having the support of their families, which shields against the effects of trauma. However, caregivers' own mental health can cause a development of intergenerational trauma and mental illness. Transitional young adults are undergoing a critical stage of brain development and identity formation as they navigate from adolescence into adulthood. As refugees, they have the added difficulties of managing trauma and acculturating to a new society. They also face losing access to social welfare programs and rights of asylum that are afforded to minors but not adults. They are at a crossroads in their life trajectories and a particular vulnerabilities, but also opportunities. Cultural factors must also be taken into account, as there's a large difference between Syrian and German cultures. Research has found increased emotional problems and acculturative stress in refugee youth who have settled in a region with a large cultural distance. Germans have generally been highly welcoming and supportive of Syrian refugees, although political movements with xenophobic and racist rhetoric have gained momentum alongside increased violence and discrimination. Resilience is not the lack of trauma, but rather the positive adaptation through challenging experiences. It's a complex interplay of both internal and external factors. Common broad themes that have been found, which increase resilience, are autonomy, purpose, meaning, and success, education, participation in the new society, social connections, and integration. Post-traumatic growth has conflicted research, but it posits that some individuals exhibit dramatic transformational growth as a direct result of trauma. Barriers to resilience in the literature are pre-migration violence and post-migration stressors, with children and youth showing better resiliency outcomes than older adults. Unaccompanied youth have the additional barriers, but they also must develop strong survival skills, showing higher traumatization, but also higher resiliency. The methodology used in this study was a qualitative, descriptive phenomenological design. This design is ideal for contextual understandings with little previous research, and it seeks to find the essences of meaning rather than statistics or explanations, using interviews and first-person accounts. The goal for this study was to interview 10 Syrian refugees in Germany between the ages of 18 to 26 years old. However, only 5 participants were interviewed, but this is still a number that is consistent within phenomenological designs. They were recruited through the German organization Place for Refugees and snowball sampling. This table shows the demographics of the 5 participants. There were 2 females and 3 males, and it demonstrates that there is a good deal of diversity between them. And all 3 males had arrived in Germany unaccompanied. So for data collection, SurveyMonkey was used for participants completing the informed consent and their demographic info, which was all available in Arabic, English, and German. Interviews were semi-structured with 12 prepared questions and lasted between 45 minutes and 2.5 hours over Zoom. An interpreter was present at all of the interviews. 2 of the interviews were completely in Arabic. The interviews were recorded and transcribed, and all participant data was encrypted and stored securely. Pseudonyms were assigned to participants to protect their confidentiality, and at the end of interviews, participants were debriefed and given information for several German organizations who specialize in mental health and other resources for Syrian refugees. So for data analysis, Atlas TI was used for qualitative coding with its AI-assisted coding used in the second round, and Excel was used for demographics. Memoing journaling practices were used throughout the entire process to reflect on decisions made and on my own experiences. The coding process followed the standard methods for descriptive phenomenology, and multiple cycles of coding were done to build the codebook. This diagram shows the social ecological model, and it's depicting that all of these layers really interact with each other, both inwards and outwards, with the closest spheres to the individual being generally considered the most impactful on development. In this study, the mesosystem was really barely discussed, so its codes were merged into the exosystem because the influence on participants was best reflected there. Okay, results. This is showing the most frequent codes that were found for resiliency. I'm not going to go too deeply into the most frequent codes, but I did want to give you an idea of what some of these codes looked like. Using tables really helped to clarify the data and see which codes were used the most frequently. I also tracked in my memos which topics were the most apparent weight and importance to participants. Also note that community interactions was the most frequent code here, and other codes in these top codes intersect and overlap with that, such as cultural factors, integration, daily life experiences, and sense of belonging. These are all related to relationships in various contexts, from classmates to teachers to an employee at the grocery store, as well as cultural norms, politics, and media. So I hope it becomes clear how many of these codes intersect and interact within many layers of context of the social ecological model, as well as in each individual's experience. For the barriers, the most frequent code overall was also community interactions, which was quite interesting. This demonstrates just how important aspects of the community impact young adult refugees across multiple contexts. The core themes and essences that were found were the social construction of the term refugee, community interactions, cultural factors, identity and culture, education, and individual factors and traits. So unfortunately, we don't have time to go through all the wonderful quotes from the participants, though I hope to touch on a couple of examples. So regarding the social construction of refugees, participants rejected the refugee label, desiring to be seen as individuals. They felt that this term carries baggage of social expectations, like reliance on aid, lack of integration, being a victim and an outsider, and pitied, that belie their resilience and self-identities. This was fascinating because it was brought up by all of the participants, and yet I had not asked them anything about it. Community interactions was the most significant theme influencing both resilience and barriers. Related concepts like societal norms, perceptions of refugees, discrimination, daily experiences, and belonging were also came up frequently. Even cultural values played a role as participants tried to figure out how to integrate into German culture and also shaped how community members perceived them. Overall, this highlights the significant impact of social environments on individuals. These interactions, both subtle and direct, shape how refugees view themselves. Cultural factors were implicated in both fostering and hindering resilience. Participants all felt there were significant differences in perceptions of resilience between Syrians and Germans. For example, in Ghazi's quote, he talks about the warmth of people talking with each other in the community in Syria. And in Germany, he felt like they were cold and distant, and he sees that disconnect from each other as being less resilient culturally than Syria, where it's much more collectivistic. Cultural factors appeared in two primary ways. Often, culture was experienced through means of describing community interactions, as seen previously, and it was also used in talking about identity. So all participants shared confusion about where they fell on the gradient of cultural identity. Traits of both Syrian and German cultures were sometimes in conflict with one another, and participants at times felt like they were more one than the other, with a reversal later in the interview. The impression that came through was that of, I am sometimes Syrian and sometimes German. I am both Syrian and German simultaneously, and I am neither Syrian nor German, as in Dunia's quote here. While seemingly contradictory, these were really embodied by multiple participants throughout their interviews. All participants also talked about how they saw themselves and their formation of their self-identity, how they grew through experiences and education, their self-esteem, their hobbies and goals, and groups that they socialized in. Education was important for all of the participants, even though it wasn't among the most frequent codes. All participants had their education interrupted while they were still in Syria. And for example, Zahir, he was motivated to study political science in Germany as a tool that he could use as another aspect of activism, which was vital to his identity. Adam had big dreams for his education and career, but he felt like those were dashed when the German government told him that he would lose any welfare support and housing if he went to university instead of taking a menial labor job. Hafsa was wheelchair bound since birth, and due to lack of accessibility in Syria, she had never attended school prior to arriving in Germany. And she was very driven and excited to learn. She rapidly caught up to her peers and has since even published a book. Individual factors and traits that came through were adaptability, personal development or growth mindset, determination, or perseverance. These were helpful for resilience, but they did not strongly impact barriers. However, these skills were most often apparent when talking about difficult circumstances. So sometimes they would be coded both as a barrier and resilience, because a participant would be talking about a traumatic experience, but how they applied these skills and grew from that experience as well. So, for example, Ghazi's leg had been shattered in a bombing attack, and his migration was extremely difficult. But his determination really helped him to make progress emotionally and physically once he was in Germany. And Hafsa was pushed in her wheelchair by her sister on foot to Germany, and she even demanded to get on a raft to cross the sea, even though the smugglers initially refused her. She actually saw the whole migration experience as a big adventure. And she talked a lot about how one's mindset influences if they develop resilience or not. In this discussion section, I will be framing how those themes found fit in with other research, which are all cited on the slides here. So firstly, the refugee label can negatively impact individuals' self-perception and resilience. Refugees desire to be seen as individuals beyond their refugee status, emphasizing the importance of positive narratives and agency. I also acknowledge the contradiction here, in that throughout my study, I have used the terminology of Syrian refugee. Refugees navigate a complex interplay between their personal and cultural identities, and their resilience is influenced by cultural views of refugees and their ability to resist negative stereotypes. Community interactions can be potent protective factors, but negative interactions can be significant barriers. Both resilience and community interactions can fluctuate over time, serving as a dynamic process which can intermingle individual traits and cultural values. An inclusive society has been found to be essential to positive resilience outcomes. In cultural psychology, behaviors must be understood within their cultural contexts. Community interactions transmit and reinforce cultural values and beliefs. Social contexts influence how individuals form their identities and experience resilience. This served as a common thread that impacted and was impacted by many other domains throughout the study. Cultural factors are crucial contextual determinants of resilience and its barriers. Balancing a multicultural strengths can build a strong identity and support mental health. Transitioning between cultures can be challenging, especially with a large cultural distance. Syrian culture, which is collectivistic, positively impacted resilience through strong community interactions, family bonds, and cultural pride, helping refugees maintain a sense of identity. However, participants struggled with the weight of cultural expectations and trauma, and the war has eroded trust between Syrian communities. German culture is more individualistic, but it fostered resilience by offering essential resources and safety with a focus on equality over hierarchy, and provided opportunities for personal growth and integration. On the other hand, rigid societal expectations, bureaucracy, discrimination, and politics were barriers, challenging refugees' sense of belonging and identity. Together, these cultural factors shaped resilience by requiring them to adapt within both supportive and restrictive environments. Participants frequently discussed aspects of their identity formation and the challenges of acculturation, expressing confusion about their cultural identities. Young adults are in a critical stage of identity exploration, attempting to establish a coherent sense of self. Hafsa talked about wanting to have a normal life, hanging out with friends, going to the movies, procrastinating homework, and she was also active in advocating for disability rights for refugees. Dunia's sense of identity fluctuated, describing herself as neither fully Syrian nor German. That reflects identity diffusion. And Adam experienced both a sense of belonging and alienation in Germany, illustrating the ongoing negotiation of cultural identity. Zahir identified with other immigrants, united in their activism against human rights abuses rather than with Germans. Interactions at multiple levels of the social ecological model shaped participants' sense of self and resilience. Education was highly valued by the participants, and it represented hope, identity, autonomy, success, opportunity, and agency. It fosters resilience in creating goals to better one's life, social connections, well-being, and integration, but it's also stressful. The disruption of school due to war has profound consequences for life trajectories, and it has barriers such as language difficulties, understanding different educational systems, and managing mental health. Supportive connections with peers and teachers can promote resilience, though negative interactions are barriers to self-esteem and identity. Education is a cultural tool which shapes worldview and identity, and it involves multiple levels of the social ecological model as well. The individual traits of adaptability, personal development or growth mindset, and determination or perseverance were useful in helping participants promote resilience, but had little effect on barriers. For refugees, adaptability and determination are essential for navigating challenges throughout all stages of migration. In the developmental resilience model, these traits serve as protective factors that mitigate the impact of significant adversities. Personal development is akin to the process of developing wisdom, and it's built in the context of adversity and challenging events, leading an individual to alter their self-perceptions and gain new skills. Some participant statements had the duality of being both a barrier and a promoter of resilience because traumatic and immensely stressful events were simultaneously catalysts for growth. Pre and peri-migration was a unique aspect of this study, although we did not delve too deeply into it with participants, as the major focus ended up being on post-migration. That being said, in pre-migration, barriers were primarily related to culture, historical context, trauma, and community interactions. Syrian culture actually played a dual role, both hindering and building resilience. And the individual traits of self-reliance, determination, and identity development were essential in pre-migration in developing resilience. In peri-migration, community interactions helped to build resilience, and the individual traits of adaptability, openness, and determination also came up frequently. Another unique aspect of this study was focusing specifically on young adults. They had experiences common in young adulthood, like figuring out their identity, career and education goals, a focus on friendships, mental health, and self-esteem issues. They had the additional pressures, though, of significant war trauma, acculturation and integration, and conflict between their cultural identities. Participants felt that younger generations of Syrians were more open to seeking mental health support, although this conflicts with findings elsewhere. Navigating the German bureaucratic systems alone was overwhelming for the participants who were unaccompanied. But for participants who were accompanied, they felt that having caregivers did help ease some of those transitions, but they still felt they lacked guidance for understanding how German systems worked. So a limitation of this study was that there were few participants, so it's unlikely that saturation was achieved. However, a strength is that the participants had diverse experiences and identities, giving varied perspectives. Additionally, resilience factors are complex and interconnected across many different domains, which make them very difficult to categorize. Though a strength was that most interviews were quite thorough and discussed experiences throughout migration. Another limitation is that there's always the possibility for researcher implicit bias, as coding is a naturally subjective process. However, the AI-assisted coding in Atlas TI helped to minimize this by acting like a second coder. And additionally, the use of journaling was done throughout to reflect on my own biases and positionality. 2 of the interviews were completely in Arabic. There was a noticeable difference in that there was a lot of interruption to the flow of conversation by having to speak through an interpreter. And participants found it difficult to break their chain of thought every few sentences to allow the interpreter time to translate. However, having an Arabic option gave the opportunity for some participants to be part of the study and express themselves accurately. So implications for this study are its usefulness for working with Syrian refugee young adults or developing policies which affect them, such as for mental health clinicians, social workers, educators, politicians, organizations, etc. Individualized approaches would be advised in helping young adults find autonomous goals, hope, and meaning in their lives. It's important to remember when working with young adult refugees that each person has their own needs, personalities, and experiences separate from the refugee label. Some ideas for promoting resilience would be to find communities that allow young adults to explore their interests, build their identities, and connect with others. They may also need assistance in building coping skills and addressing bureaucratic barriers, including academic support to reach their dreams. Finding opportunities to take action and give back through volunteering or activism could also be helpful, as it came up as being important to most participants in this study. Here are some ideas for advocacy and changes in support systems in policy, but I'm not going to go through these. I do get into depth on them in my written dissertation, but I just wanted to give you a glance of what those were. So recommendations for future research. There's a lot of ideas that we could modify the age bracket or compare resilience between accompanied and unaccompanied refugees. The date of arrival could be looked at as a factor because, as some of my participants noted, there is a drastic difference in the context and available support between 2024 and, say, 2016. Since we've had COVID and other wars erupt in that time, taking attention and resources away from the crisis in Syria. Additional research would definitely be needed in pre and peri-migration, and cultural factors of other host countries could change how this demographic perceives resilience and specific barriers. A mixed methods study idea, which I thought was pretty cool, was comparing how young refugees perceive their interactions in their communities and compare that to the demographics of their neighborhoods, like political affiliations, resources available in close proximity, like mental health support, integration services, housing, fresh food, etc. So, in conclusion, this study used a descriptive phenomenological design to understand the lived experiences of resilience and its barriers in Syrian refugee young adults in Germany. The detailed narratives shared by the participants gave a rich depth of understanding of a diversity of contexts, backgrounds, and personalities. And it highlights that while there are common themes, each person is their own individual. The study benefits the population directly by validating and bearing witness to their experiences, recognizing their strengths and challenges, and building awareness to advocate for their needs. And actually, multiple participants shared at the end of their interviews that they found the interview itself to be healing and motivating for them. The major themes that were found, which impacted both resilience and barriers, were the social construct of refugee, community interactions, cultural factors, identity and education, individual factors of adaptability, personal development and determination or perseverance, connected significantly with resilience, but not to barriers. These findings demonstrate that resilience is not just an individual trait, but an intricate interplay between personal skills, culture, community, and systemic factors. Most of the current research on Syrian refugees focuses on trauma. However, qualitatively studying how young adults develop resilience and their perceived barriers to doing so has not been previously explored. Therefore, this study brings vital new contextual information to the field of international psychology. And that is my presentation. Thank you all so much. I've got my references if anyone wants to dig through them. And yeah, thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful job. And you did it within the time. Great job to you and
Nailed it.
Dr. Hughes. Great job. Okay, so I will now turn it over to Dr. Hughes, and Dr. Hughes will guide your committee now, Dr. Wong, and Dr. Robinson, on a 30-minute question and answer period. Okay, and then after that, again, we will open it up to the general public. Dr. Hughes, it's all yours.
All right. Well, I will ask our two readers for you to start to provide some questions.
Sure. Well done, Emily, too. You are, I mean,
Thanks.
impeccable timing for
Yes.
one. Well done, defense. What motivated you to conduct this study in the first place?
Well, I actually, I mean, as a therapist, I work with kids and young adults with trauma. So trauma as a direction has always been interesting to me and something that I care about. And the Syrian crisis, you know, when we saw those images of those kids, like there was a drowned boy on the beach and a kid, you know, covered in blood, just totally shell-shocked. Those images really touched me and moved me. And then I think it was in 2014 or so, I went to Jordan. And in Jordan, I was asking local people, like, what issues do you all notice here? And Jordan has a large Syrian refugee population. They're bordering Syria. And that came up a lot as concerns around them. And so I was like, okay, I really want to go with this. And then I came across your dissertation, Dr. Robinson, on trauma in Syrian refugees. And that kind of just really got me excited about the topic. Now, partway through my chapter 1, I read an article by a Syrian author. And he said, actually, and some of my participants said this as well. He said, like, how people are reflected by what's around them is what they internalize. And he saw all this research coming out on trauma in Syrians, but nothing on resilience. And he said, we really need to change the narrative because people are internalizing this and seeing themselves as victims, and that becomes what is projected in the media and cultural views. So that really struck me as well. And I said, you know what? Yeah, I want to change the focus from trauma to resilience, and let's try to add something to the narrative that reflects positivity. And so that, you know, I mean, trauma is important. These Syrians go through severe trauma, as you know. And so it is important to understand that and understand how it affects people. But there's also the importance of understanding of how do they move through that? How do they grow from that? And in turn, you know, reflecting back to the community. You know, an individual hearing messages of resilience might say, you know, despite all of this horrible shit I've been through, excuse my language, I still have an opportunity here. Like maybe I can tap into this. Maybe some of these traits do apply to me. And even if they feel really bogged down and trapped in mental illness, they might start seeing a path forward. So that's what really drove me into this topic.
Thank you for sharing. And I could certainly see why Bronfenbrenner was one of your major theorist choices too, to see how resiliency occurs. What are some of the factors? So I've got a couple more questions, but I wanted to make sure that I turn it over. Were there any other major theorists that you were really drawn to beyond Bronfenbrenner?
Bronfenbrenner, definitely a big one. So briefly on them, like that model initially was much more conceptual for me in developing the study. But then I actually didn't apply it as a framework until after I had done a few rounds of coding. And then I started to see, wait, these really do fit into that. And even though I had sort of had that already in the back of my head, I overlaid it on top of the codes rather than like saying, oh, these codes need to fit here, here, and here. It was like, these are the codes that emerged, and this framework really works well. So that was really helpful and actually changed it from being theoretical, conceptual into this is what this really looks like in action. Like, I get it. This is it makes sense. And similarly, Mastin and Cincetti, Mastin in particular, really renowned researcher on resilience and refugees. And they developed a theory called the developmental resilience systems model, I believe, where they took that social ecological model and they said, let's specifically take resilience in systems and place that within this context. And so they really talked about how does one develop resilience through that lens. And so that was also extremely influential for me. And to note that they say, even though their work specifically works with refugees, they also make it clear that this model applies to any system. It can be an individual, it can be a community, it can be a family, it can be the environment, all of these stages of how someone or something builds strength and finds either sort of a return to normalcy or even stronger positive adaptation would fall like so yeah, they theorize on that. I'm not quite sure how to end that sentence, but yeah.
Love it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Did you have another question, did you say?
I'd be happy to turn it over to Dr. Huang to get some in first, and then yeah, I've got one more.
I thought I heard one, so that's what you were saying.
Yep.
All right, well, Dr. Huang, I'll let you go next.
Thank you. First of all, Emily, congratulations for reaching this stage.
Thank you.
And I cannot tell you how proud I am. It's been a long journey, work together, where I started off as your dissertation chair until after the proposal. It's been a long journey, but I'm very, very proud.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm sorry. I wanted to say that in the introduction, but Dr. Flo was with me through the first 3 chapters in the proposal, which was, yeah, a challenging process. So she was my chair for that period.
So I cannot tell you how proud I am for you to be at this stage. So a couple questions I have in mind. You discussed post-traumatic growth, and we understand post-traumatic growth is a positive psychological change that's experienced as a result of adversity and challenges in order to reach a higher level of functioning. And we know that transformation as a higher level of functioning can lead to many different outcomes, and it's different for many people, but potentially it can allow for more creativity or new skills to be developed or better collaboration. You mentioned about connection and also appreciation of gratitude. So throughout the data collection, when you were working with this population, have you encountered anyone that really stands out for potential with creativity, the ability to build new skills, better collaboration that really stands out, contributing towards a higher level of functioning as an individual and also contributing to their culture as well?
Yeah, great question. And there's 3 in particular that stand out to me, which is Hafsa, Dunia, and Zahir. And Hafsa, as I mentioned, had, been born with a disability, had been in a wheelchair since birth. And, I think a lot about how that might have changed her perspective, like in seeing the migration experience as an adventure, right? Because she hadn't been able to do a lot of things. In Syria, they lived in an apartment, on the third floor or something, and with stairs. So she didn't get to go out very much. And so to her, and she really encapsulated this idea of like your mindset creates your reality. And so that was really what she talked about. And like she had never been to school. She taught herself English by watching American soap operas in Syria. And, so she had all these challenges, but I wonder sometimes if growing up with those challenges in some ways primed her, if that makes sense, to be more open to other challenges, even though they're very different. And obviously, being in the middle of a war zone is much more of an intense experience, an acute experience of trauma. So I wonder if, her process was a lot about, it was about like, now I get to experience the world. And yes, it's terrifying, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to get there. I'm going to be pushed in a wheelchair on foot through like the Balkan Mountains, to her, it was, and then like jumping in school, never having a formal education in Germany. I mean, she caught up so fast. And she really encapsulates that, I believe. But at the same time, I kind of wonder, maybe not, because she grew up in this mindset of being limited, and therefore everything was new and exciting and an opportunity to her. Whereas someone like Zahir, a lot of trauma, and he was very active in politics, in activism and protesting against the war and human rights in Syria. And I mean, he had horrific experiences where, his friends were shot and killed right next to him, and they would hang up their friends' bodies to be seen as, as to let people know this is what's happening. And just the severity of that experience, but how he carried that trait within him of wanting to advocate for people, stand up for human rights. And when he got to Germany, continuing that, studying political science in university, because he wants to find tools in politics to be able to understand what is going on in these conflicts and how do I stop it? What can I contribute? What are other means to preventing this from happening? And he, a little sidetrack too, but he's very interesting in that in Germany, the term Ausländer, it means like outsider. It's typically used by Germans to identify people who are migrants or refugees, but it carries that social construct of it's sort of derogatory. It's sort of, it's isolating. It's saying you're the other, right? And what is also interesting, and this actually came up in literature as well for Turkish migrants also did this, but Zahir, he starts to take that term, Ausländer, and identifies with it and says, yeah, we, our whole group, all of us migrants and refugees, we are the outsiders. And they bond over that and sort of take it over as a positive self-identity. So it's really fascinating because in German, it carries a negative connotation, but a lot of people actually find community and bond over that label. So that was fascinating. And that's really where his identity really lies, is in doing advocacy and activism work. So that was fascinating. Yeah.
That's interesting. As you were explaining in your answer, you mentioned about mindset. And I understand there are three aspects that are central to resilience. They are resilience mindset, adaptability, and transformation. So I was wondering, because not everyone has a strong resilient mindset to begin with. And have you encountered anyone in this population who might not have engaged in a resilient mindset to begin with? And how might that actually turn out to be an obstacle towards the post-traumatic growth? And for those you have discussed just now, who have a strong resilience mindset, do you see a strong path for adaptability and transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, Ghazi really stood out as someone who was very absorbed in his trauma. He had arrived in Germany the latest. He had only been there 2 years when I'd interviewed him. Everyone else had been there 5+ years. So he had arrived, I think, sort of in the tail end of COVID. So there were a lot less resources, there were a lot of restrictions, he had less opportunities to integrate. And he had also spent more time of his life in Syria. So he had been exposed over many more years to more traumatic experiences. And I think he struggled a lot with trying to define resilience for himself. And so in some ways, I saw resilience in him because he says like, oh, like, when I got to Germany, I had to do physical therapy because of his shattered leg from the bombing. And that really helped me physically, but also emotionally, because I felt like there was all this support around me. People were encouraging me, and I developed this mindset of like, yeah, I'm gonna do it. And the incredible, and he didn't necessarily say it in himself, but I hear it in his narrative. Well, I mean, he said that part himself, but in his narrative of migration, that he's going through this extremely treacherous journey, being shot at, starving, with a leg that is completely destroyed, basically, and trying to walk from Syria and cross the borders over into Turkey. And, to me in that, I see so much determination and perseverance, like how much that takes to, you've got to go on. You've got to get there. This is your last option. And then he describes when he got over the border, just the immense relief and hope he suddenly felt. So, it's interesting in that regard because, yeah, like he in some ways didn't really see himself as resilient, but he said all of these things that really reflected those traits of resilience. So I know that he probably has quite a challenging road ahead of him. I know he's, talked about struggling a lot with mental illness. And but it's also really inspiring to see that growth in him and how he pushed himself through those experiences. And I mean, but you're right. I mean, not everybody possesses those individual traits. And that is also where the context comes in, the layers of that social ecological model, right? Like, if an individual may not have strong traits internally of resilience, there are all these external factors, and especially for people that are coming like from a collectivistic culture, right? Like your locus of control is really more external than internal, really placed on your connections and interactions with other people. And so, in situations like that where you may not have the internal resources, hopefully you are surrounded by contexts in your community, in your family, in the culture that support resilience and give you the best opportunity possible, right? And yeah.
Thank you. So, one last question,
Okay,
very short question.
Sure.
I remember in the beginning, we did discuss the potential for a mixed method approach. So you mentioned about future study. I remember we discussed it at the very beginning, but we were worried about the sample size and the point of entry.
Yeah.
So as a future scholar practitioner, after you graduate, so the sky is the limit. When we understand, although resilience is key, but it is also a start of a process. So if you are to take this same population to perhaps a future study as they grow older? You mentioned about resilience change as different developmental stage, or you work with other population from other developmental stage. What other elements or construct are you interested to find as the next step as a scholar practitioner?
Well, let's see. I've really gotten sucked in now by resilience, and the population of young adults. But I would be interested in looking at other, other cultures of refugees, particularly, or migrants. I really am very interested in the young adult age bracket, but I might, expand that a little more to be like 18 to 30, because some of the literature does say like they consider that young adult. It's very conflicted on what young adult is defined as exactly age bracket wise. But that will give the opportunity for more participants. But also, yeah, like the mixed methods idea. Yeah, that had been sort of the initial thinking in my chapter 1 is like, I want to go with that. Because yeah, I think it creates a strength. I think qualitative research, of course, brings that context and that understanding. Statistics, it can be hard to extrapolate from numbers. What is the real experience here that's going on? What does this feel like? What does this look like, right? But it also has the benefit of having very clear data. So my like tables showing the frequency of codes, well, that was very helpful for me in trying to understand and really look at this. But this is not a quantitative study. So those codes are all subjective to my experience. And so adding a quantitative layer in some ways backs that up, or disqualifies it, and saying, no, this is what that really is, what those numbers really look like. And especially if you can distribute it to, say, 200 people instead of 5 or even 20, I think it creates a lot more generalizability. But even if it's more generalizable, I would still recommend that people use individualized approaches working with young adult refugees, or just about anyone really. In that, I understand that for organizations and governments, that you sort of need a label. You need to qualify people for certain services. You need to have an understanding of what that means and what that is. And therefore, you can't individualize every intervention or approach. However, there can be sort of, based on sort of broad themes, they can say, okay, well, we want to put energy and funding into improving community interactions for refugees. Okay. And then social workers who are working individually with refugees one-on-one can then really tailor that to what is this person's needs, what are their interests. So even if I had 200 participants and we said, oh, this is like fully saturated, we have statistics, and we can probably generalize this to broad populations, I would still say, you need to treat each person individually and let those labels shed away. I think I went pretty off track with your question, but I got excited.
No, Emily, I'm sitting here and thinking what you told me last night about the questions. In terms of being able to answer them, you're going. Okay, let's go back to Dr. Robinson, because I know she has a question and we're down to 8 minutes. So
Okay.
I'm going to give kind of a closing question. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. And thanks for the time check too. I'm tongue-tied today. I was going to ask you how much time we've got for questioning. So my last one was just, what are the unanticipated outcomes of your research study? What were maybe some findings that surprised you?
Yeah, so definitely the social perception of refugees. the social construction rather, and well, it includes perceptions, but and the community interactions, the the social construct of the term refugee. I had already looked into that and discussed it in my chapter 1 and 2 before I did the interviews, but I thought of it mainly as a lens for myself. Like I need to be viewing this through this lens. So I was pretty surprised that they didn't say social construct, but they would say things like Zahir said, I don't identify with the term refugee. I see it everywhere. I mean, yeah, technically I am a refugee, but that's a label someone else put on me. And so they used words like that, and every participant brought it up in some fashion. So that really was surprising because I didn't ask any questions connected to that at all. So they all brought that up. So I was like, this is a theme I need to focus on. This is important. And it was not something I foresaw as being important to them. And community interactions in just in how much it affected both promoters of resilience and barriers, that it had that dual role. And I think it really shows that, for young adult refugees, but for most everybody, we would be impacted by how our community sees us and labels us. But specifically to this population, that was incredibly important. And, I know you talked about people also feeling like they didn't identify with the term of refugee. And those are interconnected, community interactions and, a social construct of refugee. And so yeah, those really stood out as very surprising to me and not what I expected. I expected to see more individual traits. And yeah, so that was really interesting.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, there were so many. It surprised me too when I found out when I was reading through your research and the question wasn't asked and they were bringing it up because it just immediately reminded me of research with the adult population.
Yeah. So, yeah, apparently it affects not just young adults, but older adults as well. This is because you found that as well. So.
All righty. I think I have a few minutes. So.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I think this has been very, very, very informative and enlightening. And it keeps saying to me, as I've been listening to it, it's like the wording that we use for people and the labels that we give. So many times we're not even aware of the impact, and yet it's a strong one. So I have it's kind of a mixed question. So how do you think conducting this research contributed to your overall development as an international psychologist? And then the second part of it is, how do you anticipate that your dissertation may contribute to your future career path as an international psychologist?
Well, firstly, there are some sort of what I consider sort of basic things, such as skills like learning Atlas TI, learning how to use a qualitative program and really in practice, and learning how to do coding. In a lot of our classes, we talk about it more conceptually and theoretically, but actually doing it is a whole nother experience. So I think those skills as practical skills are really important moving forward to know how to do those things. Also, I think, well, it really, it applies all of these concepts that we learn in international psychology and, yeah, makes them visible and puts them into practice rather than writing a paper about it. It's really actually doing it and understanding it at a deeper level. And I think I've always had pretty good cultural humility and cultural awareness, but I think this process only deepened my ability to do that. And in terms of like a future career, I think, well, my dream job is to develop study abroads and field experiences using sort of a decolonized psychological model, not the sort of Western psychology that tends to get pushed. And I think my ability to connect with people across cultures is really valuable for that. And again, doing this dissertation has really expanded on my ability to do that. So actually, one thing I did want to mention is that as a bias that came up for me that I had to be very aware of was that I'm a therapist. As a researcher, I cannot be a therapist, right? So at the same time, I am aware that Syrians are collectivistic. They relate to each other, and that I feel like I would get better responses if they felt they had a connection to me. So I had to simultaneously remain impartial while also coming across warm and, curious and open. And I think that really worked well because several participants did say towards the end of the study, like, I thought you were going to be this very cold, rigid person just asking me facts, and you weren't, and I felt like I could trust you. So that tells me that while I have to be very aware of how I'm projecting myself and where that line is between I am not here to heal you, but I'm here to bear witness to you, really is just important to constantly develop and grow and understand that line and consider, does that move with the population that you're working with?
A lot to consider.
Yeah.
A lot. We talked about a lot of this as we've been working together.
Uh-huh.
A lot of those things came to my mind.
Yeah.
Well, I think that at this point it is, the phone is bringing up flowers, so so much for that. So I believe, Dr. Luter, we are going to be able to now have our public or listeners ask questions. Think so. And you're all on. It's kind of hard to see you though. So I guess, can you raise your hand if you have a
Yeah, so
question?
we can open it up to the general public now, and you can either raise your hands or just pop one. And this is for you to either ask questions or share comments. This is a wonderful time. I think I see family and friends present. So this is a wonderful time if you want to share your comments with Emily or ask questions, either one.
And make sure to unmute
You know
yourself.
me, can I raise my hand?
Okay, there we
Yes,
go.
and make sure you unmute. I think Rindy Higgins, you're muted. If you're trying to talk, we can't hear you because you're muted. Sorry.
I think
Did I
Douglas
beat,
was trying.
did I beat Rindy? Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
we can hear
Okay,
you.
sorry, I wasn't sure. Well, hi, Emily. Wow. Wow. I'm so proud of you, but I'm not gonna gush about that and gush about that later. One of the most interesting things of this is looking at the difference between maybe research historically and modern research and the methods you go about it. The fact that you used AI in coding was one of the most interesting things. And while I guess I know a little about it, I mean, is there anything more you can say about that? How that actually worked out? What that did for you?
Yeah. So the way it works, like in Atlas TI, it's all secured and confidential, so none of the information leaks out of the program. But so first I coded everything myself. And then I went through again and was coding it again myself. And then I went through and there's this option, like you can select a bit of text, like in the interview transcript, and you can right click on it and pops up a little menu saying, AI suggested codes. And what was interesting was most of the time, I mean, I reviewed every code it suggested manually. I didn't just say, yeah, do it. I looked at it and I said, is this really congruent with what the participant says? Most of the time, those codes were pretty much exactly what I had already coded. However, sometimes they offered a different perspective. So that was also really interesting because I'd be like, I didn't think of it quite that way. So then it adds, validity to those statements and those codes and adds like another diverse perspective based on what the AI interpreted it to be. So
Nice.
everything was done manually as well. And I didn't I didn't tell it to do it for me, and I checked everyone that it suggested. So yeah.
I'm not a researcher, but I sure do feel old. Thank you.
All righty. Anyone else has a question? Yes.
So Emily, I'm all teared up, of course, through all of this, watching your maturity, your presentation style, your language, but most of all, your heart. Your heart was in this along with your head. And that's what I treasure so much about you. I'm also shocked that you have spent all these years doing this, and I've known a bit about it, and I can't wait to read it if I can understand it, the whole dissertation. But you know, I'm just blown away and proud as can be, and I'm so glad that a person like you is in this world to make it a better world. So thanks for being here, Em.
Thank you so much.
Well done.
Thank you.
Francine? I see your hand. Francine?
It looks like Lauren Beth.
Who is it?
Lauren.
Oh, Lauren. Okay, I see it. Oh, I see what I'm doing. Yeah.
Hi. Sorry, it took me a minute to come off mute. That was amazing, Emily. I've known you since we were 16. So I've seen you work passionately on this for years now and going all over the place. And I've heard you, your excitement and your frustration and just, I just watched you plug away at it. And even through all your health stuff, you just kept persevering. And what an amazing topic that you chose. You told me a little bit about it here or there, but really hearing you, the culmination of everything and your travels and everyone you talk to was just, it's really inspiring as someone who also works with a lot of, I'm in New Haven, Connecticut. I'm very far away. But just working with a lot of refugees that come through the area, just to really hear what I think my biggest takeaway is that they didn't identify with refugees and not talking about the trauma, but the resilience and just, they're like, yeah, okay, we're refugees, but like, we're a person, we're here. And it really touched me. And I'm just so proud of you. And I'm glad I was able to be available to watch this. So I'm so proud of you.
Thank you so much for coming, LB.
Of course. That wasn't really a question, but yes, that was great.
Anyone else who's on the call?
Well, Emily, you have done a fabulous job. This was so impressive. I think that just kudos to you. Kudos to your dissertation chair. The best dissertations are those that are done conscientiously, that people really take their time and work through this process. And I've seen you grow so much in your journey towards getting your PhD. So it's been amazing. We are also very proud of you. I think Dr. Hughes could not have done a better introduction. You're just like an extension of the IP department anyway. I know Dr. Pasanya always says, once you're in the IP, you're always in our family, but you are definitely a core part of this IP department and family. And so we appreciate you. This has been a fabulous job. To everyone else there, lots of congratulations. Well done in the chat box. To everyone else, again, we thank you so very much for supporting Emily along the way, and for being here today and taking time out of your busy schedule to come and hear the amazing work that she's done. And to Dr. Wong, Dr. Robinson, thank you so much for being amazing committee members for her. And Dr. Hughes, as always, thank you so much for guiding her through this process and getting her here. You could not have had a better and more appropriate well, I love it when it's just a good fit of a dissertation chair. So this was just an amazing fit. With that being said, this will conclude our dissertation defense today. We do ask that everyone, with the exception of the committee, leave. So everyone, including our candidate, will leave. Emily, I'm sure you will talk with your dissertation chair later today. And then you will hear something from the department officially by tomorrow. Victoria, no pressure. So by tomorrow, maybe today, we'll see. But you will hear from the department either later today or by tomorrow. But thank you all so very much. This does conclude our dissertation defense, and the committee will remain with Victoria for the deliberation. I can't talk to now. I've been in too many defenses today. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you all being here and supporting me.